Yep. Give me a nod when you're ready.
Like fourth.
Shooter's ready. Stand by.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of Bullets and Bourbon. This week we have Ben Berry. Ben is a production grandmaster living in the Raleigh area. He has his own podcast, Short Course, where he shares candid and very well thought out observations on the shooting sports. Ben is an active volunteer. He designs stages for Sir Walter Gun Club and does some other stuff around there as well, and the North Carolina section. And that's also where his wife, Stephanie, is the section coordinator. But welcome to the podcast, Ben. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
And I need to mention the most important part. He's currently running for Area 6 director. So, but we'll start off with some background stuff. Was Raleigh your hometown? And then also, what do you do for a living, and how did you get into that?
Yeah. Raleigh. It's funny. I'm actually the exception around here. So many folks have moved here over the years, and my parents actually moved here 2 years before I was born. So I only made the cutoff. My sister was born in South Carolina, but I've lived in Raleigh my whole life, and honestly, I haven't found a reason to leave. It's the weather's okay. It's not amazing. There's enough shooting around. There's work, and so yeah, this is where I've been. As for a job, by trade, I'm a software developer. So I write software programs all day. And it was just one of those things where in high school, it was the thing I got the best grades at. So I figured, okay, let me go to college for this. Okay, this pays pretty good. I can make a living on this. And, at one point I thought I might want to make video games and do all that. But at the same time, there's something nice about just having a 9-to-5 and being able to check out and have hobbies and have a life. And so, yeah, that's where I'm at.
It's funny that you mentioned video game development. So I grew up in the Silicon Valley, and a lot of my friends, other students, they're like, "Oh yeah, game development," like that, because gaming was such a big part of our lives. And then I think they realized how toxic and demanding that culture is. So yeah, a lot of them didn't end up going that direction. But okay, so I listen to Short Course every week, and you're a very analytical guy. You're very thorough, right? Like sticking to the facts, and where there is speculation, you're very clear about like, hey, this is just speculation. Do you see a relationship between like the technical skills in your day job and your general approach to like shooting in general?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's good to always ask why, not just take the received wisdom. Now, if somebody who has a ton of experience says this is the way to do it and here's why, and the explanation makes sense, then go with it. And even if they can't necessarily put their finger on why, but it sort of makes sense, try it out, see if it works for you. But yeah, there's an element that there are all kinds of people out there with all kinds of different approaches and all kinds of different mindsets, and having that analytical approach and just sort of taking things from first principles, it gets you a certain distance. It's also kind of a pain in the butt, because I feel like I'm always questioning myself. Like, oh, do I actually know this, or am I just fooling myself? Do I actually like this way, or should I actually try shooting 115 grain bullets for a while and see if I notice a difference? And it's like, oh, dude, just stop chasing that stuff. Just dry fire. Don't worry about it. But because I mean, the analysis is definitely a two-edged sword. I do sometimes overanalyze things as well.
I think it's kind of important, like, quite honestly, just because, like, in the old school mentality of where I grew up in the military, it's like, you don't ask why. And it was a toxic environment. Whereas whenever, myself and others, as we've grown up, like my generation of Marines, we always ask the why. It's like, and people would ask us the why, and we would give them the answers. And a lot of it comes down to is the why is the intent. This is why we are doing it. This is how it's going to help you. And I'm not going to tell you how to do it. You're going to figure it out on your own, because this is how you're going to learn. And if you don't ask the why, then you're never going to grow as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, if you can apply that idea of don't just tell me the what, but tell me the why. Oh, you want to shoot the Texas Star top to bottom. Why? Well, because the plates at the top have more energy. And so you want to knock those off first. Well, then you can then take that principle and apply it to other targets. But if you just say do the what, then all you have is that one trick. But if you understand the why, then you start to see the same pattern in new places, and you can apply that same principle, and you can actually do more than just what you were narrowly taught. So yeah, I think if anybody is enforcing or perpetuating a culture of just do what I say, obviously either they don't understand the why, or they can't communicate it to you. And like you say, that's not something that you should really continue if you can avoid it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it happens in competitive shooting though, right? Because like there's a very technical aspect, you know, bullet grains, the way the insides of the gun work, all that. But then there's some unicorns in our sport where things just work for them. I know you took that class from Eric Raffel, and I was listening to your podcast recap of it, and I think, you know, some of the things you were going through everything that he told you guys, and some of the things I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think I think the feeling I was getting was that this might just be something that works for him, because he's like the greatest shooter of our generation. I can't remember exactly, but he definitely has some natural talent that lets him get away with some things that the rest of us mortals probably can't.
Yeah, I mean, I would say too, I think to some degree, committing to one technique and executing it without hesitation, that making that commitment almost matters more than what the technique itself is. Yeah, so yeah, exactly. For example, one of the things that he I think was sort of contrary to typical dogma about was he was pretty adamant about stay where you are in a position until you've confirmed that you've got your hits, and then just get out of there. This whole idea of, you know, trying to lift a foot or shift your weight, he was not really down with that, at least, you know, in the context of the class. Now maybe that's an advanced technique or something he'll apply in certain scenarios, but as a general rule, he was very much about do your shooting and then do your moving. And I think if you commit to that, and that's really 100% what you do, then it probably will work for you. If you commit and you get really good at shooting sort of on one foot, leaving a position, I think that also can work for you. Yep. And, but yeah, he was a trip. The fact that, you know, everything was about numbers for him. He wasn't just talking about a partial target. He was talking about a half partial target or a 3/4 partial target, right? It was even down to how fast is the swinger going? Not just is it an over the top swinger or a dwell swinger, but is it a fast one or a slow one? Is it kind of in the middle? Is it a high hit factor? Like the level of not just looking at something as one thing, but trying to categorize things into high, medium, low, or fast, medium, slow. It felt like, you know, we were talking at one level of analysis, and he was just operating at a whole separate one, which, I mean, given the amount of time and life, you know, experience that he's had, I'm sure he's had a lot of time to break things down and say, well, here's the difference between this and that. But it was really kind of refreshing to have someone, for me, you know, as an overanalyzer, to have someone like that basically say, no, this actually can be advantageous to break things down and look at things in this level of detail. And yeah, he's definitely a unique guy for sure.
Yeah, and it clearly works for him. I would say that yeah, but speaking of like the analytical approach, and it does sound like, you know, it's always nice to get in the heads of those top shooters, because you realize the detail with which they approach everything. But speaking of numbers, details, some of the things that you talked about on your own podcast, and also the your recent interview with Dave from Casual Shooters, like calculating high hit factors for classifiers, assessing how national slots go out, not just giving it based on participation, and just in general gauging participation across the org. Is that going to be a major initiative for you as an area director, is using that kind of approach to in the way that the board effectively governs the sport?
Yeah, absolutely. To whatever degree that you can take something and establish establish an algorithm, establish a process, establish a set of rules where you just feed in the data and you have a result and you don't have this sort of subjectivity. I think setting high hit factors is probably the most clear cut example of that, where whether it is well deserved or not, there is a wide perception within the sport that the classifiers are either too high or too low, especially on the older classifiers, that those, have been shot out. And whether or not those numbers are reliable, the fact that people feel like the classification system is just a bunch of old shot out, beat up classifiers, and so they don't have confidence in it, to me is a huge missed opportunity. It's one of the value propositions that USPSA presents to every person who shoots a match. Not everyone will shoot a level 2 match. Not everyone will shoot multiple divisions, but everyone shoots classifiers. And to me, it should really be this sense that when you get a classification and you shoot a classifier stage, you should really feel like that is an accurate barometer of your skill. You're not playing this guessing game of, oh, it's a 99 or it's an 18. They should all be correct. And so if you can look at the data, bring in some smart guys, not necessarily myself, but talk to some people who can come up with some approaches. I've talked to some people who say, well, you just take the top 1 percentile of all scores on record. So it's not an average thing. It's just, there's a certain cutoff. And the nice thing about the 1 percentile thing is it removes the issue of averaging in extreme outliers. Approaches like that, where if you can just come up with a set of rules and then people trust that the set of rules are being fairly enforced and that the system is working, then all of a sudden the classifier system becomes something that people, so in some places people do want it, but it becomes that much more of an appealing value proposition. As for things like, distributing national slots, I think that's more on the flip side of things. And maybe we'll get to this later, but I think that's much more of a values question. What is the purpose of nationals and what should nationals cultivate? Is it a place where, and I've had people say this to me, that they would not reaffiliate with USPSA if they didn't get a couple slots to nationals every year. That basically that's what they feel like they're paying for with their activity fees. And if they feel that way, well, it used to be that you got more for your activity fees. You got a copy of the scoring software, right? It used to be that USPSA paid a developer to make easy win score. And part of affiliating was you had the software that does your scoring for you instead of having to do it with a calculator or an Excel spreadsheet. Well, you don't get that anymore because it's just free. Everybody gets it, which is great. Practice score is amazing. I would not want to go back to the pre-practice score days, but for that same $3 a shooter, if you run a single classifier, for that same $3 a shooter, clubs are getting less for their money. And USPSA isn't trying to keep up with that. But that aside, to me, yes, I definitely think it would be interesting to take an analytical approach. And if we decide that the goal of nationals is to try and bring together the 400 best shooters in the country, that is actually a pretty tricky problem. And so how would you use data to do that is a great question. Again, I think there are a number of different interesting approaches. The best one is probably something I haven't even thought of yet, or I haven't, talked to somebody about yet, but having some algorithm, some process where you just go to the database of match scores, whether it's based off major match performance, whether it's you have, some combination of classifier performance and major match, you figure out some process and you just say, okay, here's every shooter in the sport ranked top to bottom. And you go down and you give out slots until you fill out your slots. And, so to me, it's much more, if we decide that that's what nationals is for, then using a data focused approach, I think makes sense. And all of that said, I am very cognizant that I would just be one vote on the board. The board is 9 people. And strictly speaking, the president sets the agenda. The board members obviously have some amount of influence. I am hesitant to sort of promise specific things because I know that my power to sort of drive the agenda will be limited, especially with some of the more legacy board members. But yes, I think that is absolutely the approach. That is the direction that USPSA needs to move into, is not requiring as much subjective judgment and just deciding what's the value that we want to optimize for, what's the algorithm for reaching that. All right, let's feed in the data. Out pops the result. If we don't like the result, let's tweak the formula. Let's tweak the algorithm. Let's tweak what we optimize for. But this idea that this one seems a little too high. This one seems a little too low. Let's just put our thumb on the scale. It doesn't work. There are 94 active classifiers, and we're about to have 9 divisions. That's
right.
I mean,
And you see that it's like super wonky when assessing, like, for example, when carry optics was a relatively new division, everyone knew which classifiers were like the easier ones to get GM on, right? So you saw these clubs running, unfortunately, like, the Pineland Pistol Club, which was the next closest match to us. Look, man, I'm telling you, the matches in Lejeune are rough, but they were running all of the 20 series and above, and maybe like hijinks, like everyone knows which ones that are a little more lenient, and everyone knows which ones are, as you said, shot out. But in terms of gauging shooter proficiency, I think we've seen so many systems crop up. If it's not like Jay Slater's like ELO system, which I think is a really interesting implementation of it, because it's primarily used for head-to-head matchups, right? It's used for chess. Right. And I think it works wonderfully for chess, but I think it could also be applied to USPSA as well. And that entirely takes in match performance and doesn't really care about classifiers. So no, I think you're absolutely on the right track, man.
Yeah. And ELO is a great, interesting example, because, one of the things that I think a good nationals policy wants to take into account is the ability for the guy coming out of nowhere in the cornfields in Nebraska or something, who is just dry firing his pants off. Maybe he didn't finish well at nationals last year, but he's been shooting lights out at a couple area matches. How do we recognize that? And in something like an ELO system, if you have 1 or 2 people that also shoot those area matches and you have an ELO rating on them, well, then you can get an ELO rating on that guy from a small data pool. ELO has its own drawbacks around inflation. So as more people come in, there's sort of more points in circulation. And so over time, it's hard you couldn't say that, GM is a 25,000 or 2,500 ELO rating, right. The way like in chess, it's a rating, and then you have to have a certain tournament performance. And then I think to actually make true GM, it's a subjective thing. They just have to invite you. They just say, yeah, this guy's earned it. Right. So, you couldn't, but in a given year, could you, just throw everybody into an ELO calculator and then just go top to bottom, giving out national slots?
Yeah.
You could do a lot worse, for sure.
You could, and what you keep touching on is like, it spits out the numbers, but there's still a very human element to gauging performance. Like, say, for example, you have someone super high on the ELO rankings, but they just had a kid and they had to step away from the sport. And so up newcomer, like, beats that person at the next major match. Well, we're going to weight that win just a little bit less because of the circumstances. And that's where context and like human understanding come in. But we've already broached the nationals conversation. So I'm going to jump over to that question, if that's all right with you. So you talked in length with Dave from Casual Shooters Podcast, and you addressed the current format of nationals. And as someone who showed up to Carry Optics Nats last year and was a little let down, I couldn't agree more. It seems like it's mostly capacity oriented, right? It's just like, let's get as many bodies in here as possible with a little bit of discernment on who we're going to allow the top tier shooters, but everyone else is just kind of a crapshoot. And in their current state, nationals level matches, they're not even the best ones out there. I just shot, some of the area matches I've been to, Dragons Cup, those were head and shoulders above the nationals experience. They're falling short of their potential, and USPSA is also doing a pretty poor job of capitalizing on media production and marketing value of these top tier events. They're spending so much time and energy putting these events together. By Yima and Lynn's own admission, that is almost entirely consuming like their staff's attention and time and energy. But if you're going to do all that, if you're going to build the castle, then you might as well like promote it a little bit and get it more in the public eye. But I know that, as an area director, you would only be one member of the board, but do you see improving the nationals model as like a key step towards streaming USPSA's other functions, like allowing them to do other things better, like replying to emails about club affiliations and media pass requests? Is like, Dave, man, he wants to go and live stream nationals and they still haven't gotten back to him. That's free press. Like that's low hanging fruit. Just take care of the guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it just makes sense. Nationals should be one big event that everybody works up to. That's the culmination of the season, and it gets all the press attention, right? There's not this question of, oh, well, which nationals is Shooting USA going to cover? Well, they're going to cover the nationals. There's just one of them. Mm-hmm. And as a sort of inevitable side effect of that, yes, the number of slots that are available will be less, but I think what would actually be, as a shooter, I think you actually can get a lot out of nationals if the coverage, if the live streaming and or somewhat time delayed streaming, but if the coverage was more available, mm-hmm. and you could get something out of watching the top guys shoot, even if you didn't get to be there. Well, obviously, if you're shooting it, especially if you're shooting on the same schedule as them, well, you can always watch the replay too. But there's an element there of, like you're saying, if you have one event, make it pay dividends more, right? Have sponsoring nationals actually be a bigger deal because there's fewer of them. Have the actual coverage of the sponsors on the live stream be more than just these little commercial breaks that break in, and it's the same commercial. If you watch the live stream for an hour, you've seen the same 2 commercials over and over again. There's a lot of opportunity there to make nationals not just a participatory event, but also a spectator sport. Something that, and maybe it's something where, being a USPSA member, you get to watch the full live stream, and then there are highlights that are cut together, and that's what's posted to YouTube, the way you see with a lot of, say, auto racing. If you want to see the whole race, you got to sign up and pay for the streaming service. Well, in this case, the streaming service is your membership. Hmm. I could see a model like that for sure.
So, one thing that I really liked back whenever I first got into the shooting sports back in 2013 and 14 is, like, we had the 3-Gun Nation Pro Series back then. And, as we all know how 3-Gun Nation went, there was some good that came out of it. Like, everybody could go shoot nationals, but then they had the Pro Series guys, and they would do shoot-offs, head-to-head competitions. They would be on their own track, and they would be going for the big dollars. Not saying, like, the money is there anymore, but there was a way to make this a national level event where you had national level competitors going head-to-head, to where everybody can see those people going up against each other. Like, so I think there are ways of doing this, just implementing them and seeing what the appetite for that would be. Like, let's showcase the best people in our sport.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, the options, that's what's cool about, Dave wanting to go to nationals and cover it his way. I think having a bunch of different people, having a bunch of different takes, but yeah, at the very least, being able to have the 30-minute cut together highlight reel, or, the stuff like the old Saul Kirsch double alpha DVDs of the World Shoot. I mean, there's a reason I still go back and watch that stuff, because there's nothing else like that about modern content, which is crazy, because he had to work so hard with such limited technology. I mean, the hat cam stuff that he was doing 15 years ago or whatever it was is insane when we look at what you could be doing now.
Yeah.
And there's just not that interest. And yeah, I get it. When you're doing 4 nationals plus a world speed shoot plus a, multi-gun nationals, it gets to be too much. And that's all the more reason to, instead of trying to spread the organization that thin, and honestly spread the volunteers that thin. I think there's a big issue about that, where when you're trying to staff that many nationals, it's tough to get that many people to work it. And at the same time, which nationals do people want to work? I know Carry Optics nationals, because slots were so hard to get for that match, they've had a really easy time getting staff, especially I think relatively highly qualified staff, because people know that, well, if I didn't win the lottery and get one of those 60 open registration slots when practice court keeled over the day that it opened, then I can go work it. And that's a sure ticket. I think there's something there, there's a model in that where, people who want to shoot and want to see the big stage but don't qualify for it, they're incentivized to work. And then that becomes this virtuous cycle with nationals, where people, you have staff, and it's not just people who have nothing better to do or people who retired. You actually have the young up and coming competitors. I mean, yes. it was legit. So if you go and watch at this bluegrass low cap match that I shot this past weekend, if you watch any of those stage videos, stage 9 was this 29 round stage. It was in a huge bay. It was probably, I don't know, I'm bad at judging distances, but it was probably 50 yards by 50 yards, something like that. And they had a crew of 4 dudes, but they were all 20s, and they had it down. They were resetting the stage faster than some of the smaller bays, just because they were really hustling. They really had that pride, that esprit de corps, which I think also comes from working a local match. Like when I work the North Carolina section match, I do that because I want North Carolina I want that reputation to be out there.
Right.
And I think people feel that way about their state match. People feel that way about their area match. And I don't know that
Nobody
people
really
feel that.
feels about nationals.
Yeah.
So here's a question, and I mean, it's just kind of off the cuff. Like, I remember we had 9 days of nationals, and during that time you had, throughout those 9 days, you had every division of USPSA competing. Now, I think it's a far stretch to try and do something like that again. I don't know. But what if you condense the amount of participants in nationals? I know everybody wants to go, but if you want it to be a true nationals, okay, let's get the true like national level competitors of each division and have them all come out for this 3-4 day event, and best versus best. Like, let's have all the divisions showcase with the best competitors.
100%. Yeah, I think you can do the math. You can play games on how many stages you can. You would need a range that would have somewhere between 20 to 24 stages. But if you can do 24 stages, basically you can get between 400 and 500 competitors in the match. And then you look at those. You look at participation per division, and then you break down the slots and you say, okay, well, we're going to invite 20 revolver people, and we're going to invite 150 carry optics people, just because that's what the participation is. But those are going to be the top 20 revolver shooters, and they're going to get to come duke it out, and they're going to be going up against each other. So at least they'll have competition with each other. And yeah, I think having it be a 4-day match, right? So you shoot 2 mornings, 2 afternoons. You basically, if you're going, you just commit. You're taking a week off of work, so you have travel on either side. You have a day or two to play with. I think just having it be that would definitely make it something more special, and you could take the time to put on enough stages to distinguish the national champions from each other. I mean, I think it's definitely something to look at is how close some of the finishes are at some of these matches, which to me says either there aren't enough stages or the stages aren't separating the shooters enough. I mean, this is another sort of, I think, somewhat unpopular opinion of mine, but shooting the stages at nationals should not necessarily be fun. They should be challenging because they should separate the best. They should be challenging to the best. And so to some degree, it might not be fun to shoot nationals, but if we're separating the best in the sport and that job is being accomplished, then I'm okay with that.
And let's be real. It's also, let's showcase and find who are the people that are going to be representing us at IPSC Worlds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even that, most people, the way the organization covers it, it's a 800-word article in front site and basically no social media coverage, and it genuinely seems like
it's lost on this country.
Yeah, which is a shame, because I think it is cool that the World Shoot happens, that honestly that so many countries are represented, that even in relatively anti-gun countries, they still have this sport to some degree or another. It's the one thing that can bring us together. And yeah, the fact that it's basically ignored, that people know who won nationals, but they don't necessarily know who won the World Shoot unless it's someone American. It's a shame.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to the whole like events coverage of it. I mean, personally, I am super invested in these national level events and World Shoot. I will refresh Practice Score Competitor, but there's got to be a better way to present it. And back to what you were talking about with Dave, he's willing to use his personal technology to go out there and produce the event. You mentioned a few things, but like there's so many ways in which we can capture the dynamic aspects of practical shooting. We have drone cameras. We have those cameras that people put on top of walls that just track the shooter around. You use a hat cam. I think you use a GoPro. I use an Instago. Like there's just so many ways that we can package it. But the best thing we have is like, I don't know, intermittent like Facebook live stream, you know, and it just it they're doing things right. Like USPSA is pulling off all these nationals. They are. But I think there's something to be said, like in terms of what you guys have been discussing about having a like one really good nationals instead of like 6 disparate events that are just kind of like meh. I think that's really what we're getting at. And something else you said that really like struck a chord was having like the next generation of ROs and volunteers step up. There's a big difference when ROs give a shit and own their stage and are actively trying to find ways to do things better. And there's a big difference between that and like, it's not all the old guard, but I've run to ROs who are just like, that's the way we've always done things. Kind of like the discussion we were having before we started recording. And so your coverage of the North Carolina sectional, it really stood out to me because it seemed like you volunteered for Chrono, did you not? Like,
yeah.
And that's considered the unsexiest part, right? Like bar none. Like, you know, I would rather work a stage, but you found a way to innovate things and like make them really smooth. And I found that really interesting. Like your whole bullet pulling setup and all that other stuff. Because I think there's a tendency within the major match system to kind of throw like, all right, like what are the ROs we have left? All right, you guys are going to be in Chrono. But that was really refreshing to see someone like actually care and actually want to improve on the process.
Yeah, and that goes back to that analytical mindset of every little thing that you look at. How can I make it better? How can I make it better? And it's funny because I drive I drive Steph a little nuts sometimes. Like I was saying, well, what if we had a mag gauge on every stage, and every time a shooter dropped a mag, we just picked it up and gauged it. And that way we don't have to gauge the mags at Chrono. We gauge, and she's like, then not now. And I'm like, okay, yeah. But I just sometimes I just come up with these things and I'm like, would this be good? I don't know, but it's an interesting idea. If it touches the ground, you pick it up, you strip the rounds out and you gauge it. It doesn't take any time. You get your empty mag back and a Ziploc baggie of bullets. And I don't know, like, it's a good thing that I'm not closer to the levers of power on some of this stuff, because I would just be going mad scientist on some of these things. But yeah, when I kind of had a free hand to try and look at Chrono with fresh eyes, it was interesting to just say, okay, this is the way it's been done. How can it be better?
I remember whenever I was first getting into the sport, a couple of years into it, I started volunteering, and it was somebody from the old guard who brought me into ROing. And a lot of 3-gun, like a lot of the younger shooters, the way they really get into the major matches and get involved into the community is the younger shooters are the ones who are connecting with the old guard, if you want to call them that, and they are learning the ways of being an RO from those older ROs. And you have senior ROs on stages who are taking the lead, the CRO. And then you have the younger shooters who are learning the ropes from them. And then, it's just building a cycle of ROs that are just constantly being raised within the sports that we shoot. And it goes back to the community aspect that we were talking about before we even started.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you can take your USPSA level 1 RO class and know the range commands and know a few things to stop a shooter for in DQ, but there's still this need to have this sort of mentorship period where you still learn the ropes and you get feedback, you have someone in a position where maybe they're running the tablet and they're more senior to you, you're running the timer, and then they give you feedback. They say, hey, maybe you short beep that guy, maybe when he misses a target, stand back a little bit so you have a little distance if he decides to go back for it. All these little things that it's too much to learn in a weekend. ROing really is a craft. It's an art more than a science. Yeah. And so treating it that way as sort of a craftsman, master, apprentice, and it doesn't have to be, a single master, but just over time, giving people feedback, giving them mentorship, and just having people be willing to learn. I mean, one of the things that's the biggest shame to me is the people who are most open-minded, most willing to put in work, and most willing to learn are the best competitors in a lot of cases. Now, sometimes you'll get a guy who comes in at 50 or 60 and he's, mentally, he's still got that fire, but he's not necessarily physically cutting edge competitor, but he's still got that humility, that willingness to learn. And I'm not trying to shortchange those guys, but a lot of these guys, if you tell them, hey, it's not cool if you shoot club matches all the time and you never take the timer. If you've been in this sport for more than 2 years, RO cert or no RO cert, if you're not picking up the timer and helping to run it at your local club match, you're freeloading. And I feel like that's a cultural issue. And I don't know how you change culture, but I think it is important to talk about that. This idea that, you know, I hear people, and I feel like I didn't used to hear this, but I don't know, maybe I'm just more attuned to it now. But people saying, "Oh, I can't take the timer. I'm not a certified RO." It's like that's not how club matches work.
So, the way I would generally handle that is like if I've been holding the timer, the tablet for a while, I would just go up to one of the competitors. Hey, I need you to take this. I don't know how to do this. All you do is click this button. These are your commands. I need you to do this so I can get ready to shoot my stage. And you just kind of like, sometimes you just got to force it on somebody.
Yep.
And then once they do it that first time, oh, this is really easy. And then they just get those reps and sets in, and then they learn. And the other aspect is, that I'll talk about, kind of going back to the community thing, is whenever I would say getting involved that way was pivotal in the development of myself as a competitor, and was pivotal in my role as taking over as the staff and CIC of the Marine Corps shooting team, just because at that point in time, I knew everybody in the sport. I had already worked just about every major event in the East Coast and like, in the southern states and like Kentucky and areas like that, to where it's like, hey, I want to get into this match. Let me call the match director and get my entire team in. Like, I already had that reputation. People knew who I was. And so like, those are the relationships that you build within the community that are so pivotal in the development of our organizations that we compete in.
Oh yeah, 100%. If somebody, we all know those guys that just give above and beyond. And, it's one of these where, I've had situations where someone like that, oh, they're looking to buy something, and I have one I can sell, and it's just like, no, dude, just take it. I don't need your money. It'll work itself out in the long term. I'm not worried about it. Yeah. Yeah. Or yeah, it's just between hardworking people who share that love of the sport, you'll go above and beyond for each other. And honestly, building those kinds of relationships, which you don't really get in corporate America, there's a real sense of sort of belonging and meaning that I think the sport can offer, and a sense of doing something that matters above and beyond, whatever your day-to-day work is, but actually putting on something that is a special experience that only happens in a few places in the country, a really excellent match. There's a sense of pride in that I think a lot of matches, and the whole dynamic around working matches, it's very much, oh, well, why would I work that when I can just pay my match fee? And there's a pride there, and a part of, if you shoot X number, 4, 5, 6 level 2s in a year, and you don't work a single one, there's something out of balance there. There should be that mix of, I'm going to be a shooter sometimes, but I travel to South Carolina, I travel to Kentucky. When I shoot at North Carolina, that's my home. That's where I want to do the best job I can. And to be totally honest, and I think we'll probably get back to this, when I really started getting burned out a few years ago at sort of seeing the way the organization was going, I turned to that because that was the place where you can have the most impact. There's this line about, maybe you're on a team of 10 people at work, maybe you're a member of a family of 4, you're half of your marriage, but you're 100% of yourself, right? So where can you have the most impact? Well, you can have the most impact on yourself, and then you can have the most impact in your marriage, right? You're one of 2, and then in your family. And so the smaller of a radius that you can actually try and influence and try ideas and see if they work. And if they don't work, then set them aside. But the idea of, let's focus locally, kind of take a step back from nationals. It's why I haven't shot nationals in a while. It's not that interesting. I want to shoot matches like this bluegrass low cap match that are doing things that I think move the sport forward or in a positive direction. And then I want to work matches that I think do the same thing. And so when you change your focus to just can I get into the biggest match of the year to how can I be a part of moving the sport in a positive direction. I've gotten a lot more satisfaction out of that, certainly.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more satisfaction to be gained. That's part of one of the reasons, I'm in the process of taking over for the Quantico match director position from Tim Hitchak.
Nice.
And I just he's been asking for a while. I'm just like, you know what? Like, I have the time right now. Like, we don't have kids. I'm mostly competitive. It's time. But going back to your point about ROing, I think it's not, I mean, it's not just that your responsibility for like the rules and the safety of the competitors. It's a chance to do some mentorship too, right? You can coach up other ROs. You can coach up like one of my might sound a little weird, but I honestly love it when I get new shooters in my squad. I'm like, I want to be your RO. Like, I want to be your face-to-face interaction with the sport. I want you to have a positive experience. I want you to get through the entire match. And if all else fails and you do DQ, I still want you to come back, because that's what keeps this thing going. It's funny though, because I've been coming to Sir Walter for a few years when I was living in Lejeune. And at one point, like I think in my third year, I had a bunch of Marines on my squad and a bunch of other randos. And I think his name's Rob Walker, like Robert.
The match director there? Yeah. Rob Walker, yeah.
He comes up in his like golf cart. He's like, Frank, could you get on your guys to like reset the stage? I'm just like, all right, I'm that guy now. Like he's like, I'm the touch point. Like, he knows that I can like rally the troops and get everyone working. But yeah, honestly, like that's one of the things that pushed me to get my RO cert. I think we're talking around Quantico trying to get a CRO course. But yeah, that's the point I'm at. I've been a competitor for a long time. I want to start giving back. But this is a nice segue into our next question, which is about just like, there's these pockets of really great matches, right? You're pretty blessed, right? Living in Raleigh, you have access to 100%. If you really want to, you can drive over to Chris Tilley's range. If you really want to, you can go over to Rowan County. And there's True North, like bunch of other really great matches, like
Pitt County, TRC.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's insanity.
It's an embarrassment. It's an embarrassment of riches.
100%.
But something that's near and dear in both of our hearts, Camp Lejeune is like a wasteland. We had Pineland Pistol Club for a little bit, and that match definitely had its issues. But it was a great place for me to bring young Marines, like new guys and girls. And I had a set of like 3 loaner guns and rigs and all that. I'm like, I got your ammo, just pay me for the ammo, just come out. I'll pay your first match fee. I just want you to come out and shoot. I would have loved to have something like that in my backyard. So I understand that like it's not necessarily an area level problem. It's not even necessarily like a sectional level problem. But from your perspective as someone who's running for the area and someone who's, you've dealt with the section a lot through Stephanie, what can be really done to bring quality matches to some of these outlying areas? Because there's definitely a demand in the Lejeune area.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think there's kind of 2 sides to the problem. One is proactive outreach, but one is also just making the resources available. So I've had a ton of interesting conversations of people who just sort of reached out, and I've been put in contact as a part of running with this. And one of the ones that sticks out in my mind was a guy who was telling me about his local club was looking to start running matches, and they didn't really care what kind they were. And so they just emailed the whatever contact email for a bunch of different leagues, and they basically got no response back from USPSA. Meanwhile, they got from, I think it was NRL 22, they basically got a whole handbook of, hey, here's what the targets you want, here's the props you want, here's how the general match flow works, here's the rule book, but here's kind of the high level summary of the rules. It was a 10-page getting started guide. And you could imagine, I mean, obviously you can send that out via email, but it could also just be posted for anybody who's just saying, what does it take to become affiliated? And then also, if you do affiliate, what resources do you get? I mean, I could imagine a program, and obviously this could be implemented at the section or the area level, but having something like this nationwide would obviously have the most effect, where when you affiliate with USPSA, it's just a known thing that not only do you get access to, this handbook, you get a curated book of stages, not just the stage library that's just diagrams that you may not even really know how to interpret. You look at a SketchUp diagram, it's like a fourth grader reading a drafting diagram for a space shuttle. I mean, there's so much nuance and detail, and this target's visible from there, that someone setting up their first match doesn't have. You need greater detail. But you could also imagine having something like a buddy system where, hey, new club is interested in joining, you get paired up with this other match director, and he's going to be your buddy, and he's going to answer your questions and help you get access to things. Here's a PDF with a bunch of different options. Here's one way to build wood walls. Here's a way to build PVC walls. Here's a way to build metal walls, and just have all this information that already exists that just could be curated, and make it so that if somebody wants to run a club, wants to start up a club, they can do it, and do it in a way that will bring people in. Because I think that, the classic issue is, okay, a guy starts a club, but he hasn't shot USPSA a lot. And so he's kind of just reading the rule book or going off what people tell him. He hasn't necessarily got around and shot a bunch of matches. And, you could imagine in that kind of buddy system, well, hey, if you're my buddy, hey, come shoot us a Walter match, or whatever whatever a top tier match in your section is. Go to that, take notes. Maybe you don't even shoot it, but just see how they do things, take notes, and have that mentorship, that one-on-one thing as well. Whereas right now, when you affiliate with USPSA, you get a website login to upload your classifiers and a place to send your money. But there really is not that level of, oh man, you want to run matches for us? Thank you. Here's everything you need. How can we make you successful? And, then at that point, if people know that those resources are out there, they know that I want to start doing matches. I could do my outlaw thing. I could do IDPA, but man, USPSA it's the easy button. I affiliate, I pay my match fee, and I get all these resources. And it's not physical resources. It's information. It's right. Advice. It could be a forum. It could be a place just to go. Maybe you ask your buddy, maybe you just post in this match director's private forum. But part of being a club, being an affiliated club, is you get access to other people across the country with this experience. There are all kinds of these options that wouldn't require really mailing anything physical. It would all just be these online organizational resources that could make it so if somebody wanted to start a new club, the information is there. And then the social bonds connecting you with people in the section, and just having someone feel responsible. I mean, I'll give a shout out to Justin Smith, who's the match director out at Pitt County. The TRC, which is it's a outdoor range complex near Bragg. They started up a USPSA match, I think, a little over a year ago. Yeah. And the match director there, he's super gung-ho. He's got a great attitude, but he knows what he doesn't know. And, Justin Smith, I believe he's the president of that gun club. He runs their monthly match, but he still has gone out of his way to do everything he can to set them up for success. And they're now selling out 90, 100 slots a month at this, 6-stage club match. They're running like 15-man, 17-man squads. Yeah. It's crazy. But like you're saying, at a place like near a military base, there's so much demand. Mm-hmm. It always puzzled me why there wasn't a successful match in the Fayetteville area. But I think a lot of it is expertise. A lot of guys cycle through. I know there used to be a club out there, but I think whoever ran it retired or moved or whatever. But Justin really has gone above and beyond to be the mentor to that match. And the fact that it has just gone from nothing to filling up to the point where I'm saying, like, dude, don't be afraid to raise your prices. If you need to justify this, or, look at running a second match or something. I mean, it's that level of mentorship has been a complete success. And so getting connected with people like that, I think is a huge opportunity. And then, to some degree, once those resources are in place, there could be some proactive outreach. I mean, I could imagine someone at headquarters who their job is they just come in and every day of the week, they just cold call a gun club somewhere in the country and say, hey, are you interested in USPSA? And, 1 out of 5 of them might say yes. And then it's like, okay, great. Here's the info dump. Here's a local club near you that's going to be your buddy. Work it out. And so just having that sort of cold calling and just pitching it, just saying, hey, if you run a good match, you can get 60, 80 people paying $20 each. You pay us 3 of those dollars. The whole value proposition of USPSA, the whole reason to affiliate is it will bring in more shooters than being outlaw. That's the goal, right? The idea is for every shooter that that you pay those $3 on, it's roughly 15% of your match fee if you're charging $20. The idea is the USPSA brand will bring in more than 15%. And so you'll end up making more money, even though you're kicking 15% upstairs. Well, if you can fill your match as an outlaw match, why affiliate? The whole value proposition is based around either getting access to information, bringing in more demand than if you were just running an outlaw match, and being a part of a community of other shooters and other matches instead of just kind of being your own one-off thing. And it's not there right now, but it could be.
Yeah, there's a lot of great ideas there. I mean, there's the USPSA has connections to so many people with a vested interest, not just within the sport, but on the business side as well. Like they could easily, establish a system with Brian Connolly, who goes above and beyond, supporting every single match he can possibly touch. Like he could possibly send a cert to a new club or like something along those lines. But just in terms of like, I'm very lucky because I am taking over a club that's run by Tim Hitchak, who is a madman and massively organized and also just like a really freaking hard worker. But the first time I ran into Tim was at Sir Walter, Pitt County, all these matches in North Carolina when he was still living in Quantico. And I've never actually asked him this directly, but I'd have to imagine that part of the reason he was on the road so often because he loves shooting, but also because he was scoping out these matches and like, hey, how do they do things? And he has his best practices down pretty good. And Quantico rose to prominence after the thick of COVID, right? And it runs Saturday and Sunday, and it sells like 150 to 160 shooters every single weekend that it runs. So I think you're absolutely onto it, just in terms of the mentorship aspect, having the resources out there. Kind of like we said, like the USPSA is doing a lot of things, but isn't necessarily doing them super well right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there have been these discussions about, would it be cool if you affiliate as a club and then you get some kind of dealer pricing on MGM steel or something that USPSA could work that out? I mean,
targets, right?
Yeah. I mean, certainly something that I think, to my mind, if you're a new club starting up, you don't, even 10 or 20% off MGM steel. I mean, that's still a big investment.
Yeah.
If you're, for that first year where you're not filling your match up, you're just struggling. I mean, I could see something like, hey, when you affiliate as a new club, you don't pay a certain amount of match fees or of activity fees for your first so many matches, just so you have that much money to plow back in. Because when it's really those early days when you need the money to not necessarily buy targets, you can get by with a few mini poppers, but it really, to me, is much more about information. People know someone who owns a welder. And if you can get the plans for, hey, here's how to build a wall stand, here's how to build a target stand, and you just get a bunch of stock, rather than ordering a bunch of target stands,
right?
Or, if you really want to go low budget because you're trying to bootstrap a match on the cheap, start with wood target stands. And then once you have some revenue, then start switching them out for metal target stands. But all that, to me, the information, the ability, giving people the tools to sort of DIY it and bootstrap a match without requiring however much money for target stands and a ton of walls and everything, especially like I was saying, in that packet of starter stages, having stages that are low props. You look at, so the USPSA stage library is all level 2 and above stages. They're stages that were submitted because they're part of state matches or area matches or national matches. By definition, those matches are being run at clubs that are awash in props. I mean, Sir Walter's got, I don't even know how many walls. We don't even really have to worry about that. Whereas when I'm designing for my small indoor match, I know I have 5 full walls, 2 half walls, 1 ported wall. I have 9 concrete buckets. I have 13 target stands. Like, I have all these numbers memorized because every month I'm running right up to the limit of that budget. Now, that's a bit of a different thing, but obviously, having more low props, interesting stages for getting started, understanding that most new matches are going to be limited on that kind of stuff. It's just information. It's just bits. It could live on a server somewhere.
to just going out there and just being like, hey, like we gotta put all this together. But wanted to move on to another topic. And so I ran into Eamon Lin when I was out shooting Dragons Cup. And I went up to him. I was like, look, man, like, I think it's unfair the way things went down. I respect the hell out of the fact that you're still out here volunteering. And, you know, something else to add is like, we had that big old sandstorm roll through. They shut down half the range, and his stage that didn't have any shooters on it. And he straight up went to the other side of the range and just helped out to make sure that they got everyone through. We didn't get done shooting until like 8 p.m. So I know that like there's been criticisms of Yemen, and not everyone is like a huge fan of him or voted for him. But as someone who did, like, just the way that all went down, the lack of due process, the lack of transparency, and the overall appearance of like a coordinated hit job to just like out somebody just because they didn't like the way he was running, doing business. How's that something that you're reacting to as a longtime member and as a candidate to be on that board?
Yeah, I mean, on the one hand, it is interesting to see how people who didn't see the issue when it was loudmouth howler monkeys are seeing the issue. But again, they couldn't have picked a nicer guy than Yemen to go after. Yeah. I mean, you can say a lot of things, and you know, I'd said on my podcast that I didn't think he was doing a particularly effective job. I think there was a lot more that he could be doing, but he was elected. He deserves to serve out his term. And yeah, the fact that the bylaws were written in this way, I've heard some people tell me that they sort of knew when the bylaws were written that this was a sort of backdoor way to get someone out. I've had other people say, oh, it was just an unintended thing. They didn't think about, you know, they rewrote this one bylaw, but the other bylaw wasn't touched. So it was an unintended interaction. But yeah, I mean, it is something that I have to take very seriously. I mean, for example, do I want to risk working the North Carolina section match this year? If somebody wants to file a discipline complaint that gets fed in the top of this machine, and out comes the bottom is a revocation of my CRO cert, is that worth it? And I haven't really decided that, but I think this is the chilling effect that this is going to have, the number of people that I think this is going to wake up. I mean, hopefully this is really the message is getting out that these guys, they are not about, and I mean, the contrast with using exactly the same bylaw to kick out the president while allowing
Area 4,
who knowingly did not have his certification and should not be allowed on the board under exactly the same bylaw. I mean, the hypocrisy could not be more clear. And yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where, and people have even said this, oh, you know, they're probably going to come after you. It's like, well, okay, if they do, then it's just going to be another stain on the reputation of this board for what they're doing when they identify someone as someone that's, you know, counter to whatever they want to do, they got to go. And my hope is it'll be me, it'll be someone else, that the ball has started rolling. I mean, there was a long time where, I mean, in 2019, Bruce Wells ran unopposed for Area 6. Nobody ran against him. I think everybody assumed someone else would do it. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the reasons I threw my name in, is that I didn't want to wait and play this game of, well, who else is going to put their name in? I was like, all right, I'm in. We'll see how the election goes. But everybody else was kind of stepping back and expecting someone else to do it. In that same election, Foley ran basically unopposed. There was a guy that ran against him who ran basically no campaign, put his name in at the last minute. And he's a nice enough guy, but you know, he didn't have any constituency, and he still got like 30% of the vote. Hmm. And so at the very least, I mean, I think the last I checked, there are 7 or 8 candidates for president currently filed, including Yemen, who I don't think is eligible if his certification is revoked for a year. But I
signed his appeal. Like I signed his he didn't even mention it. He was just, I found it just like looking at the RO table. I was like, oh shit, this is a petition to reinstate Yemen. Yeah, I'm going to sign this.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, again, I don't know that he would necessarily be my favorite person, but he definitely deserves to be able to run. And yes, if the members choose him, then that's the will of the members. But I am assuming they will probably suspend his certification with a 1-year renewal so basically he can't get it back before he would take office.
Yeah.
And so I think they've railroaded him good and hard. And again, it's ridiculous, but I think it is an overreach to the point where people are waking up, people are seeing what's going on, and there are going to be a lot of questions. I think we're going to see a lot of contested elections from here on out for sure.
Yeah, the amount of like Todd Jarrett's in there, like, yeah, I was just looking at the list and it's quite astounding. But it's really interesting to me because in that same match at Dragon's Cup, right, Yemen is out there just working a stage, right, acting as if nothing had ever happened. And I run into Mel Rodero, like walking stages, shooting as a full participant, knowing full well that he's like 6 months in, delinquent on his responsibility to have an RO certification to actually occupy the board member seat that he's sitting on. So yeah, I absolutely agree. I said the same thing when they banned all those guys, like they banned Ben Stager and like Derek Lewis, that what the way they're acting, they're just going to continue to make martyrs. And that's kind of what they've done with Yemen. Like it's just what it is, right? Like people are banning us, like, hey, you're not giving this guy a fair shake. And I think you're completely you're completely right about being worried about, someone using that trapdoor method on you as a potential Area 6 candidate. But that kind of segs into our next point, and that you've been caught up on board drama before, right? You covered it extensively on the whole Ban the Ben saga, and nothing sours a person's interaction with the sport or organization faster than someone just being absolutely hostile and a complete dick, right? Like if you show up and people are like that, your first USPSA match, you're going to IDPA, like you're never coming back to it, right? So having listened to your podcast over the years, you took some time away from the sport, you focused on the local level, you focused on your outlaw match, like the North Carolina section, like this is your community, these are your people. Can you detail like what happened in your mental headspace to basically make you say like, hey, like I need to put my hat in the ring and I need to basically step back into the arena, knowing full well that like all the stuff that like people like to talk about with USPSA, like it's very contested and very hotly debated right now. Like what got you back into that mindset?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really think that it was everything that's happened in the last few years around. So yeah, the whole story, which I talked about on episode 97 of the podcast, where in 2018, I was personally threatened with a lifetime ban from the sport over a joke on the internet by the president, Mike Foley, at the time. That was also the same year that at the local level, Steph became the section coordinator. And the reason Steph became the section coordinator was, so at the time, there was this guy who had come in as the new section coordinator. He had all these big plans. A hurricane came right up the middle of the state, or it was predicted to come right up the state. It ended up not, but he made the call. No insurance. And the thing was, he said, all right, match is canceled. And people were like, okay, fair enough. Hurricanes happen.
Where's my money?
Refund? And he said, oh, there's no refunds.
Yep.
And then
that was a big deal for us because like as a shooting team, we had all paid for it. That's government money. And whenever it was like dealing with, hey, we need a refund. Oh, well, you're not getting a refund. It's like, look, man, this is government funds. This isn't like personal funds from each individual that paid. This is big government. They want their money back. And it took 6 months. Like it was going back and forth.
Wow. Yeah. That and that's the thing is, so after he basically pieced out, like a week or two after that, he said, I resign effective immediately. You guys can deal with this on your own. And at that point, the question was, okay, somebody needs to step up. And at the time, I was looking at doing that. But at the time I was still trying to be competitive. I had just made GM the year before. So I still was going fairly hard in the sport. I was training up for nationals and the whole deal. And, we kind of talked about, okay, what does a section coordinator actually do? Well, it's a lot of administrative stuff. You interact with the clubs, and it's basically a lot of online work. It's not a lot of on the range, type boots on the ground type work. And Steph was like, what, I can handle that. You focus on shooting. And she did, and she took it, and she's been good in terms of, she's coordinated with the club that has hosted hosted the state match. We had it at Sir Walter in 2019, and then it's been at Rowan for the last few years. And so in each case, there's been a someone that's been the boots on the ground and sort of partnered. But seeing that effect, seeing that idea that well, we're at this crossroads. We could let someone else try and pick up the mantle, or we could actually step in, because you always assume, oh, there's got to be someone out there who's more qualified. There's got to be someone else out there who's just waiting to do this. And that experience really showed me that there isn't necessarily. And listen, if there is somebody else out there who, is raring to go and wants to be the next section coordinator, reach out. But it's one of these things where most of the match directors are so worried about, keeping their match running. Everybody's involved with their own day-to-day stuff. And, sometimes you just have to be the one to step in. And when all this stuff unfolded, and this was, the stuff with Steger was kind of and everybody else, Ben and Derek and Pat and Joe getting banned. That was kind of the last straw. But what I just saw over and over again from all these decisions, start going all the way back to declaring hammers a minor internal component on a double action, single action gun, through, changing the weight limit, magnets, flashlights, appendix carry, all these, the calibration rules, all of these changes over the years, it just seemed like there was this voice that was missing on the board. And so when that happened, and I knew the election would be coming up this year, I said, okay, I'm going to file my paperwork and we'll see where it goes, because it may just be that it's time for someone else. And I didn't know who else was going to end up running. Now we know who the candidate list is. And, hopefully that's why I want to do all these podcasts, is why I want to do my podcast. I want people to feel like they know how I think about things, and whether I am a good match for their values and what they want to see represented on the board. And if I'm not, fair enough. I have a very, particular analytical approach. Now I'm open to having my mind changed, but I want people to know what they're voting for. And if they want what I'm putting out, then I'm happy to do it, because I can't just sit back and wait and hope that someone else is going to step in.
Yeah, very well said. And I appreciate the level of transparency and also the critical thought on your podcast. And I would just like to take the moment to say, as is a podcast, myself and Matt, Ben Barry is our endorsement for Area 6. I met Ben first when I moved from California to North Carolina. I'd been shooting USPSA for about 6 months. I'd just gotten a brand new Shadow 2. I introduced myself as a refugee from political violence, in the state of California. I drove all the way to Sir Walter, and Ben was on my squad. I noticed that he was shooting, I think he was shooting Tanfo still at the time.
Yeah.
And I saw him decock the hammer because his name starts with a B and he's before me the shooting order. I kind of freaked out. I was like, dude, I didn't realize you had to do that. Like, how do you do that? And he walked me through it. He was super chill about it. So like my first positive experience shooting USPSA in North Carolina was with Ben Barry. And over the years, going back to Sir Walter, just seeing him and Stephanie and the amount of work that they put into the section. I squatted with them when they were working the North Carolina section a couple of years ago. And just listening to his podcast over the years and getting to know him. He's a very qualified candidate. He's going to think things through. He's going to listen to the people in his area. He's going to make himself available. So unfortunately, I'm no longer a resident of Area 6. Otherwise, slam dunk, you'd have my vote, man. But for all you listeners that are in Fort Bragg and in Camp Lejeune, we touched upon some things that are specific to those bases here. He's obviously listening, and he's obviously thought about the issues in those remote areas that don't really have quality matches. So I would, do whatever you do, your due diligence looking into the candidates. But he's our recommendation, and I think he's going to do great things.
I'll add, whenever I was first killing the Bullseye team, and before I killed the Bullseye team and I was doing the transition of getting a USPSA team started, like I'd be driving out to Camp Perry, pulling my hair out. But while I was pulling my hair out, driving out to Camp Perry, going crazy, in the truck, I would have the Marines in the vehicle with me, and we would be listening to Ben Barry's podcast. And it was always like, hey, we have to listen to this. This is the direction that we're going. This is how we are going to set up a team and take an analytical approach to training in order to become the best versions of ourselves whenever it comes to competing in USPSA. And so like his approaches work, his ways of thinking works, and it was kind of the establishment of getting the Marine Corps shooting team a USPSA team, to where we are now.
Gosh, guys, I really appreciate that. I was yeah, I really, that's the thing is, yeah, I want the sport to be here. I want it to be healthy. I want, guys who actually, I mean, this is just a hobby for me. It's a hobby I take very seriously. It's an interesting playground for all this analytical thought, but the odds of me actually having to use a gun on another human being are pretty darn low, and I hope they stay low. But there are a lot of guys that they hope that probability is high, and there are people out there that need shooting, and I hope that they can do as good a job at that as it can. And I think having USPSA as a crucible that you can test your skills, as a reservoir of knowledge, where when you need someone who can come in and in a week teach you 20 years of collected knowledge, that's what the sport needs to be there for the guys that don't have 20 years to spend learning it. And I'm humbled and I appreciate it. And yeah, I really do just want what's best for the sport. If I wanted what was best for Ben Berry, I would not be running. That's for darn sure. It's going to be, it's whatever the outcome is. It's there's definitely more drama associated with being involved than not. But again, it's one of those where when I look back on this 10 years from now and I say I could have done more, I don't want to do that. I don't want to look back and say, well, I could have done more. So.
Heck yeah, man. Hey, for those of you listening that are USPSA members, the voting period is going to open from June 15th to July 16th. So if you're in Area 6, do due diligence. Make sure you vote. A lot of elections are up this summer. It's Area 6, Area 8. If you're in Quantico, then you fall in Area 8 as well as the recently vacated USPSA president spot. So stay engaged. It's going to affect the future of the sport. USPSA is still going to stick around at the club level. Good matches are still going to be around, but it's important that we take a moment to take a vested interest in the future of the sport, because it can regress in some pretty painful ways, as we've talked about on this podcast. But Ben, we appreciate your time. And for our listeners, if you want to get in touch with Ben, his podcast is called Short Course. His contact information is on there. And we're going to include contacts for his Instagram and all any other way that you might want to reach him in the information. But thanks for listening, and let us know how we're doing.